What comes to mind when you hear me say the word disability? Is it someone who uses a wheelchair? Is it someone who communicates via sign language? Is it someone who looks like me? Not too long ago, I would have seen someone who looks like me coming out of an accessible toilet and just done a double take. Or I would have seen someone who looks like me parking in accessible parking. Just check to see if they have a permit. My ideas about disability were so rigid that it stopped me from understanding that I was disabled. So how did we get there? Growing up, I was an elite athlete in the sport of canoe slalom. I attended my first nationals at 9. By 14, I was on the national team, and I was training up to 40 hours a week and doing cross-training like gym and swimming. Growing up in sport teaches you a few things. I thought that being healthy, you had to look a certain way. I thought you had to eat a certain way. And I thought that you had to work through the pain. In 2014, I injured my back. I had a stress fracture, and I only found it 6 months after the fact. I hadn't told anyone because I was working through the pain. After touring Europe in 2015 and attending the European Championships, I became very unwell. I was sleeping days on end. I was unable to walk or feed myself. I started experiencing episodes where my arms and legs would stop moving, which I would call at the time temporary paralysis. After 4 months in isolation, being bedbound, I was finally diagnosed with myalgic encephalitis, otherwise known as chronic fatigue syndrome. I was devastated. My dreams of the 2020 Olympics were gone. At 16, I was having to reevaluate, was I ever going to have a career? I lost friends. People didn't know how to talk to me because I wasn't getting better. I remember having to face this reality that my life was never going to be the same. After 8 months of being bedbound, of being isolated and only having my family as social interactions, I started experiencing the dynamic nature of my disability. I could now leave the house, even if it was only to attend a half day per week at school. I could see some friends sometimes, but most of the time they didn't know how to deal with my issues. I remember asking my vice principal if I could complete my last year of high school over 2 years. It was available to me as an athlete, so why wouldn't it be now? I remember stating my case, and he looked at me and said, "You don't look ill." After trying to plead my case and tell him how my 1 half day of attendance in the last 3 months and how my 26% in my maths exam were due to me being chronically ill, I started tearing up. And he looked me in the eyes and said, "Is this your illness coming out?" People kept telling me that I could push through it, and I was so used to working through the pain that in 2017 I decided to attend the state championships. After 1 run, I was carried to the car park, I was driven home, and I slept for a week. I hadn't learnt my lesson though, and in 2018 I attended the national championships. After each run, I had an exercise-induced asthma attack, I was carried back to the first aid tent, and I slept again for a week. I was so used to working through the pain, even though my body was screaming no, I didn't know what that meant. It took me 6.5 years of living this disabled life for me to even register that I might be disabled. And that's because of something called ableism. Ableism is where the norms and standards of non-disabled people are so expected that disabled people's lives are often seen as other or inferior. What I was experiencing was called internalized ableism, which we all experience, whether we have a disability or not. It could be every time you put on makeup to cover up your dark circles. Or it could be every time a negative, significant life event is hidden from your workplace because you don't want to be seen as incapable or unprofessional. For people with disability, this often looks like asking the questions, am I disabled enough? How are people going to view me once I start using my mobility aids in public? Am I even allowed to use the accessible seating? But this internalized ableism comes from somewhere. It comes from legislation such as the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992, which is supposed to protect people with disabilities, but uses words such as malformed, disfigured, and disordered. It comes from architectural design, where the accessible entrance is around the corner and not the main entrance. It comes from segregated schooling as the only option rather than supporting people with disabilities through mainstream schooling. It comes from jobs, where in 2021 the Disability Royal Commission found that people with disability were legally being paid $2.37 an hour, while minimum wage was $20.33. This ableism tells people with disability that we do not belong here. So I've talked about what disability isn't, but what is it? Disability to me is when you experience barriers to accessing the world. That could be through your body, such as if you have cancer, fibromyalgia, or epilepsy. It could be through social barriers, where people don't understand the way that you move, the way that you communicate, or the way that you think. Often, it's a combination of both. When we use this definition for disability, we start realizing that a lot more people are disabled than we originally thought, and that's okay. We also realize that most people will at some point in their life become disabled, whether that's temporarily, whether it's through aging, or through life events, or through world pandemics such as COVID. And that's okay too. It's important that we use the right language so that people can connect with their communities who are going to hold space for them, who are going to guide them through their grief and their pain. And that is why disability is not a dirty word. It's an accurate word. It doesn't mean that I can't do things. It means that I experience barriers that I need to work around. Often people are scared of the word disability. They think that the prefix dis means none, as in no abilities. In this case, dis actually means different. We have different ways of doing things. When people use words such as differently abled or disability, where the dis is crossed out and the A is capitalised, people think that they're being inclusive, but actually they're perpetuating this idea that people with disabilities can only be seen for what they can contribute to the world. When people use words such as special needs, they're insinuating that our needs are special or extra and additional, only to be met sometimes. When actually, as humans, we are all social creatures. We all rely on each other to have our needs met. It's just that sometimes people with disabilities' needs aren't being met, and so they're often more visible. When we refuse to use the word disability, we take away power from the disabled community. So I want to take a second to discuss what it means to connect to community. Back in January this year, I was at a disability conference and I was with a disability advocate, Cindy Liao from Victoria. We had some time to explore what Canberra had to offer, and Cindy looked at me and said, I'd really like to go to Parliament House. It's 600 metres away, and I've already checked there's paved pathways, there's benches, there's shade, and we can stop as many times as you'd like. This was one of the first times that someone had wanted me to be in a space with them so much that they had looked up my access needs and made sure that I was included in this space. These are some of the things that community taught me. Community also taught me how to create spaces that were accessible for everyone. Community taught me that my work is too important to burn out, and so I need to prioritize my body and I need to prioritize rest. My community taught me how to be unapologetically disabled, how to navigate the world using mobility aids, and that if you're using a mobility device, that people are going to look. So make sure you give them something to look at. All of these lessons that community taught me, I wouldn't have ever been able to learn had I not started using the word disabled. And who are we to deny others from connecting to this same community, the community that saved my life? I'd like to now take a moment to imagine a disabled future. Imagine if we saw people with disability everywhere, not just in spaces where we're meant to inspire. Imagine if we saw people with disabilities thriving in whatever way success meant to them. It would be happening in ways that we couldn't even imagine. Imagine if we allowed people with disability to self-determine what independence meant to us, rather than having funding bodies make independence equal job. And imagine if accessibility aids were so normalised that all we talked about were the latest brands and the latest specs, rather than reluctantly wondering if it's time. I'll tell you what that would have done for me. I would have still mourned the changes in my body. I would have still experienced that grief. But I wouldn't have been terrified of not having a career, because I would have known that I can have a career that suits my needs. I wouldn't have been so ashamed of what was happening to me, because I had people who were telling my stories out loud when I was trying to keep mine so quiet. I wouldn't have lost so many friends. People with and without disability would know how to talk to me about my health. So how can we get to this disabled future? This disabled future means practicing disability culture. And disability culture is the act of caring, enough that we allow everyone to be equal in all spaces. We can get there by reframing our point of view. Are the stories that the media are telling actually relevant to the lived experiences of people with disability? Or are we being portrayed as inspirational or cost burdens? We can get there by reframing our values. Have you been prioritising work and productivity over health and rest? We can get there by thinking about the way that we use our language and what we say both out loud and to ourselves. Are we using words like crazy, nuts, insane, dumb, idiot? Often when we use the words crazy, nuts, or insane, we actually mean unbelievable. Or when we use the words dumb or idiot, we actually mean that someone has made a decision that we wouldn't have made ourselves. We can get there by celebrating disability identity and disability culture, putting people's real stories on front page news, and celebrating what it means to be disabled. And we can get there by redefining what we think of as disability. Does your definition of disability now include someone that looks like me? We can all play a part in building a disabled future, because an accessible future is a future for all of us.